Most people spend their entire lives trying to control something that was never theirs to control in the first place. They chase approval from strangers, replay old conversations in their minds, worry about opinions they can never change, and carry emotional burdens that grow heavier with every passing year. Ironically, the harder they try to hold everything together, now imagine another way of living. Imagine waking up without the constant need to prove yourself. Imagine hearing criticism without feeling personally attacked. Imagine losing something important without losing yourself. Imagine discovering a kind of freedom that doesn't depend on your job, your relationships, your bank account, or the opinions of people around you. This wasn't just a dream for the ancient Stoics. It was a discipline, a way of seeing the world so clearly that unnecessary suffering began to disappear. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire surrounded by betrayal, war, disease, and political intrigue. Yet in the quiet pages of his private journal, he kept reminding himself of one simple truth: your peace belongs to you unless you hand it away. That lesson is just as relevant today. In a world where every notification competes for your attention, where social media encourages comparison, and where success is often measured by external validation, learning not to care about the wrong things may be one of the greatest skills you can develop. But here's the catch. The Stoics never taught people to become cold, indifferent, or emotionally numb. They didn't advocate ignoring loved ones or pretending that pain doesn't exist. What they taught was far more powerful. They taught the art of caring deeply about what truly matters while letting go of everything that never deserved your peace in the first place. This distinction changes everything. By the end of this journey, you'll understand 7 timeless Stoic principles that can help you release unnecessary anxiety, stop seeking constant approval, and build an inner stability that no external event can easily shake. Let's begin with the foundation upon which every other Stoic teaching rests. The first principle is this: care only about what you can control. At first glance, this sounds almost too simple, but its simplicity hides extraordinary depth. Epictetus, one of the greatest Stoic teachers, began his famous work, the Enchiridion, with an observation that has survived for nearly 2,000 years. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Those few words contain an entire philosophy of freedom. Your thoughts, your choices, your values, your effort, and your character belong to you. Other people's opinions, the weather, the economy, your past, unexpected setbacks, even your own reputation, these ultimately do not. Think about how much mental energy disappears every single day because people fight realities they cannot change. Someone criticizes them online.
A coworker receives the promotion. Traffic ruins their morning. A relationship ends. An investment loses value. Instead of asking, "What can I do now?" the mind asks, "Why did this happen to me?" That subtle shift transforms a challenge into suffering. Modern psychology supports this ancient insight. Researchers have repeatedly found that people with an internal focus, those who direct their attention toward their own actions rather than uncontrollable circumstances, tend to experience greater resilience, lower stress, and higher life satisfaction. While they cannot eliminate adversity, they respond to it with far greater effectiveness. The Stoics understood this long before psychological studies existed. Imagine standing in the middle of the ocean during a storm. Can you command the waves to calm? Can you order the wind to change direction? Of course not. But you can adjust your sails. That is the Stoic mindset. Life will always produce uncertainty. Markets rise and fall. People disappoint us. Health changes. Plans collapse. But within every storm remains one territory no one else can occupy. Your response. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that external events are neither good nor bad in themselves. What gives them emotional power is the judgment we attach to them. This idea feels almost counterintuitive. If you lose your job, isn't that objectively bad? The Stoic answer is more nuanced. Losing a job is certainly difficult. It may create financial pressure, emotional pain, and uncertainty. But whether it destroys your character depends entirely on how you interpret and respond to it. Some people lose employment and spend years trapped in bitterness. Others lose the same job and discover a completely different career that transforms their lives. The event remained the same. The judgment changed. This doesn't mean pretending painful experiences are pleasant. It means recognizing that your interpretation often creates more suffering than reality itself. The next time something goes wrong, pause before reacting. Ask yourself one question. What part of this situation actually belongs to me? Maybe you can't control what someone said, but you can control whether you replay those words 100 times tonight. Maybe you can't change yesterday's mistake, but you can choose today's action. Every time you redirect your attention toward what is within your influence, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. And over time, those small victories compound. The second principle may be even harder. Stop making other people's opinions your identity. Few things imprison modern people more effectively than the desire to be liked. It's understandable. Human beings evolved in tribes where belonging often meant survival. Being accepted increased cooperation, protection, and access to resources. Our brains still carry traces of that ancient wiring, which is why rejection can feel disproportionately painful.
But today's world magnifies that instinct in ways our ancestors never imagined. A single social media post can expose us to thousands of strangers. One critical comment can overshadow hundreds of compliments. We begin editing our personalities, our ambitions, even our dreams, not because they're wrong, but because someone else might disapprove. Without realizing it, we hand strangers the keys to our emotional well-being. The Stoics saw this danger centuries ago. Epictetus warned that if you seek approval from everyone, you inevitably become a servant to everyone. Think about what that means. Every compliment lifts your mood. Every criticism ruins your day. Every opinion becomes a command. That isn't freedom. It's emotional dependence disguised as popularity. Consider Cato the Younger, one of Rome's most admired Stoics. Whether people praised him or mocked him, his decisions were guided by principle rather than applause. He understood that popularity shifts with circumstance, but integrity remains. History repeatedly confirms this lesson. Abraham Lincoln endured relentless criticism throughout his presidency. Winston Churchill was celebrated, dismissed, then celebrated again, depending on the political climate. Nelson Mandela spent decades imprisoned before becoming a symbol of reconciliation. If these figures had allowed public opinion to dictate their convictions, history would likely remember them very differently. The lesson isn't that criticism should be ignored blindly. Sometimes criticism reveals blind spots and helps us grow. Wisdom requires humility. The Stoic question is different. Instead of asking, "Do people approve of me?" ask, "Is this consistent with my values?" Those questions lead to completely different lives. One seeks applause, the other seeks character. And character remains long after applause fades. Most people spend years polishing the image they project to the world while neglecting the person they become in private. The Stoics reversed those priorities because eventually the crowd moves on. The trends change, the headlines disappear, but the person staring back at you in the mirror remains. Learning not to care about every opinion isn't arrogance. It's recognizing that your worth was never created by someone else's approval. and it cannot be destroyed by someone else's criticism. That realization marks the beginning of genuine inner freedom. Once you stop allowing other people's opinions to define your identity, another challenge quietly emerges. It's the fear of losing what you already have. We become attached to success, relationships, possessions, routines, even the version of ourselves we've carefully constructed over the years. We convince ourselves that if we can just hold on tightly enough, life will remain stable. But life has never worked that way. Everything changes. And that brings us to the third Stoic principle. Let go of what you cannot keep. This isn't a pessimistic philosophy. It's one of the most liberating ideas ever developed. The Stoics understood something that modern culture often tries to ignore. Everything external is temporary. Youth fades, money comes and goes, careers evolve, children grow up, friendships change, loved ones eventually leave us, whether through distance, circumstance, or the natural course of life. Many people spend their lives pretending these realities don't exist. Then, when change finally arrives, they experience not only loss, but also shock, as though life has somehow broken an unspoken promise. The Stoics believed suffering often begins with that illusion. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that everything in nature is in constant motion. Empires rise and fall. Seasons change without asking permission. Rivers never hold the same water twice. Human life follows the same rhythm. Resisting this truth is like standing on the shoreline, trying to stop the tide with your hands. The ocean isn't your enemy. It simply follows its nature. So does life. One Stoic practice that illustrates this beautifully is known as premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of adversity. To many people, this sounds negative. Why imagine losing something you love? But the purpose isn't to create anxiety. It's to create gratitude and resilience. Imagine leaving home each morning while quietly remembering that nothing in life is permanently guaranteed. Not your schedule, your health, your comfort, or even the people you love. Suddenly, ordinary moments become extraordinary. You listen more carefully. You complain less. You appreciate conversations that might otherwise feel routine. You stop postponing kindness, far from making life darker. This awareness fills it with urgency and meaning. Modern psychology echoes this principle in surprising ways. Studies on gratitude consistently show that people who regularly reflect on life's impermanence often experience greater appreciation for the present. When we stop assuming tomorrow is guaranteed, today's opportunities become infinitely more valuable. Viktor Frankl understood this truth through unimaginable hardship. After surviving Nazi concentration camps, he wrote that while everything can be taken from a person, one freedom always remains: the freedom to choose one's attitude. Frankl lost nearly everything external, yet he refused to surrender what mattered most: his inner character. His story reminds us that attachment to externals creates fragile happiness, but attachment to virtue creates enduring strength. This doesn't mean you shouldn't love deeply. The Stoics never argued against love. They argued against possession. There is an important difference. Love appreciates. Possession demands permanence. Love accepts change. Possession resists it. Imagine holding a handful of sand. Close your fist too tightly, and the sand slips through your fingers. Hold it gently, and it remains. Life often works the same way. The more desperately we cling, the more fearful we become of losing. And fear quietly steals the joy of what we still have. This idea connects beautifully with another Stoic principle known as Amor Fati, the love of fate, not merely accepting what happens, loving it. At first, that sounds almost impossible. How could anyone love failure, or heartbreak, or illness? The Stoic answer is subtle. You don't celebrate suffering itself. You embrace the opportunity hidden within it. Every hardship becomes raw material for courage. Every disappointment becomes training for wisdom. Every setback becomes a chance to practice resilience. Without resistance, there is no strength. Without uncertainty, there is no courage. Without loss, there is little appreciation. The obstacle, as later writers inspired by Stoicism often summarized, becomes the way. When you stop demanding permanence from an impermanent world, something remarkable happens. Fear begins to loosen its grip. You still care. You still love. You still work hard. But you no longer build your identity on things that time can take away. And that changes how you face every challenge ahead, which leads directly to the fourth principle. Master your emotional reactions. Notice what the Stoics never said. They never claimed emotions were enemies. They didn't ask people to become emotionless statues. In fact, they recognized that emotions naturally arise. The real question is what happens next. Do emotions become wise advisors or reckless rulers? Think about anger. Few emotions feel more convincing in the moment. Someone insults you. A driver cuts you off. A colleague takes credit for your work. Within seconds, your body changes. Your heart beats faster. Muscles tighten. Thoughts race. Everything inside you whispers the same message. React now. But here's the paradox. The emotion that promises strength often produces weakness. How many friendships have ended because of one sentence spoken in anger? How many careers have been damaged by one impulsive decision? How many regrets began with the words, "I wasn't thinking clearly"? Seneca devoted an entire treatise to anger, calling it a temporary madness. Not because feeling anger makes someone irrational forever, but because uncontrolled anger narrows perception. It convinces us that immediate action is wisdom, when patience would often produce far better results. Modern neuroscience helps explain why. When intense emotions take over, the brain's threat detection systems become highly active, while the regions responsible for careful reasoning become less influential. In simple terms, emotions can temporarily hijack judgment. The Stoics observed this through experience long before brain scans existed. Their solution wasn't suppression, it was awareness. Imagine standing beside a river. Thoughts and emotions flow like the current. Most people jump into the water and are carried wherever it goes. The Stoic learns to stand on the bank first, to observe, to ask, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Does this emotion deserve my obedience? That brief pause creates extraordinary power, because between stimulus and response lies choice. James Stockdale, an American naval officer held as a prisoner of war for more than 7 years in Vietnam, credited Stoic philosophy, especially the teachings of Epictetus, with helping him endure captivity. He could not control his imprisonment, but he could control how he met it. That distinction preserved not only his sanity, but also his dignity. Most of us will never face circumstances that extreme, but every day presents smaller versions of the same challenge. Your child refuses to listen. Your boss criticizes your work. A friend cancels plans. Someone misunderstands your intentions. In each moment, the temptation is identical. React automatically. The Stoic alternative is remarkably practical. Pause. Take one slow breath. Examine the story your mind is creating. Ask whether you're responding to reality or merely to your interpretation of reality. Very often, those are not the same thing. Someone ignores your message. Your mind immediately assumes they're angry. Hours later, you discover their phone battery died. The suffering wasn't caused by reality. It was caused by interpretation. This is why Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that events themselves are neutral. Meaning is something the human mind continuously creates. The goal isn't to eliminate emotion. It's to prevent emotion from becoming your master. Courage still exists. Compassion still exists. Joy still exists. Even grief has its rightful place. But none of these emotions should erase your capacity to think clearly. The strongest people are rarely those who never feel deeply. They're the ones who refuse to let temporary feelings dictate permanent decisions. When you begin mastering your reactions instead of being mastered by them, you discover something extraordinary. Freedom isn't found in controlling the world. It's found in governing yourself. Once you realize that your greatest victories are won within, your relationship with life begins to change. You stop asking, "How can I make everything go my way?" Instead, you begin asking a far more meaningful question. What kind of person am I becoming because of what happens to me? That single shift in perspective leads us to the fifth Stoic principle. Remember that your time is limited. At first, this may sound unsettling. Most people avoid thinking about death whenever possible. We distract ourselves with endless entertainment, endless work, endless scrolling, as though staying busy can somehow make us forget the one certainty every human being shares. The Stoics chose a different path. Rather than avoiding mortality, they reflected on it regularly. They called this practice Memento Mori. Remember that you must die. To modern ears, it can sound dark or depressing. But for the Stoics, it was neither. It was one of the greatest sources of clarity. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that he could leave life at any moment. He didn't write these words to create fear. He wrote them to eliminate procrastination. If today truly mattered, why waste it worrying about insults from strangers? Why postpone telling someone you love them? Why delay becoming the person you know you could be? Mortality has a remarkable way of exposing what is important and what is merely noise. Think about the arguments that consume so much of our energy. A rude comment online, a coworker taking credit for an idea, someone cutting in line, a neighbor who seems impossible to please. Now imagine learning that you had only 1 year left to live. Would those problems still deserve the same emotional investment? Probably not. The facts may not change, but their importance certainly does. This is one of mortality's greatest gifts. It shrinks trivial concerns and magnifies meaningful ones. Modern psychology has explored a similar idea. While awareness of mortality can create discomfort, it can also inspire people to align their lives more closely with their deepest values. When people are reminded that time is finite, they often become more intentional with relationships, purpose, and personal growth. The Stoics understood this long before laboratories and academic journals existed. They knew that forgetting death often leads to forgetting how to live. Consider Theodore Roosevelt. Throughout his life, he endured profound personal tragedy. He lost both his mother and his wife on the very same day. The grief was overwhelming. Yet over time, rather than allowing suffering to define him, he devoted himself to purposeful action, public service, exploration, and lifelong learning. His circumstances did not become easier, but his awareness of life's fragility gave urgency to how he chose to spend the years he still had. Every sunrise is quietly asking a question. What will you do with this day that will never return? The Stoics would encourage us to answer not with grand speeches, but with ordinary actions. Be honest when dishonesty would be easier. Be patient when impatience feels justified. Show kindness without expecting recognition. Do the work that matters even when no one is watching. Because in the end, a meaningful life is not measured by how long it lasted, but by how wisely it was lived. Memento Mori is not an invitation to fear death. It is an invitation to stop wasting life. And once you begin treating each day as something precious rather than guaranteed, another transformation naturally follows. You become less concerned with how people see you and more concerned with who you truly are. That brings us to the sixth principle. Build your character, not your reputation. Modern culture often teaches the opposite. We are encouraged to cultivate a personal brand, to collect followers, to chase status, to carefully manage how we're perceived. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a good reputation. Trust and credibility matter, but the Stoics warned against confusing appearance with substance. Reputation lives in other people's minds. Character lives in your own actions. One can disappear overnight. The other stays with you wherever you go. Imagine two people. The first is admired by everyone around them. They know exactly what to say to win approval. They appear confident, generous, and successful. But when no one is watching, they cut corners, break promises, and compromise their values whenever it benefits them. The second receives little recognition. Few people praise them, yet they consistently keep their word, treat others fairly, admit mistakes, and choose integrity even when it costs them something. Which person possesses real strength? The Stoics never hesitated in their answer. Virtue is the only true good. Everything else, wealth, fame, power, popularity, is secondary because all of it can be gained or lost through circumstances beyond our control. Character, however, is built one decision at a time. This is why the Stoics placed such enormous importance on the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Wisdom helps us see reality clearly, rather than through the distortions of ego or fear. Courage allows us to act according to principle, despite discomfort. Justice reminds us that every person deserves fairness and respect, regardless of status. Temperance teaches moderation, protecting us from becoming slaves to impulse, excess, or desire. Together, these virtues form the foundation of a life that remains stable, even when everything else changes. Think about Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War. He faced criticism from nearly every direction. Some believed he moved too slowly. Others believed he moved too quickly. Newspapers attacked him relentlessly. Political allies often questioned his decisions. Had Lincoln governed only according to public opinion, his leadership would have shifted with every headline. Instead, he continually returned to principles larger than popularity. History remembers him not because everyone agreed with him in the moment, but because he remained committed to what he believed was right. The same lesson applies in ordinary life. Imagine a workplace where unethical behavior has quietly become normal. Everyone exaggerates results. Everyone blames someone else when mistakes happen. Everyone cuts small ethical corners because that's just how things work. The easiest choice is to follow the crowd. The Stoic choice is different. You ask, who do I become if I participate? Because every action is a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. James Clear popularized this idea in the context of habits, but the principle itself echoes ancient Stoic thinking. Repeated actions shape identity. Small decisions accumulate into character. You don't suddenly become honest. You practice honesty. You don't suddenly become courageous. You practice courage. You don't suddenly become disciplined. You practice discipline on ordinary days, long before extraordinary moments demand it. This is why the Stoics viewed daily life as continuous training. Every inconvenience became an opportunity to strengthen patience. Every disagreement became an opportunity to practice fairness. Every temptation became an opportunity to exercise self-control. Nothing was wasted. Even failure had value if it revealed where more growth was needed. This perspective changes the purpose of success itself. Instead of asking, how can I impress people? You begin asking, how can I become more wise? Instead of measuring yourself by promotions or possessions, you measure yourself by your responses under pressure. Can you remain calm during conflict? Can you admit when you're wrong? Can you celebrate someone else's success without envy? Can you act ethically when no one would ever know otherwise? These questions reveal far more about your life than any title on a business card. The paradox is that people who stop chasing admiration often earn deeper respect. Why? Because authenticity is difficult to fake. People instinctively trust those whose actions consistently match their values, even if recognition never comes. The Stoics would argue that you've already received the greatest reward. You have become someone worthy of your own respect. And once your identity rests on character rather than reputation, very little in the outside world can shake your sense of self. That kind of inner stability cannot be bought. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be given by applause. It must be earned through countless quiet choices that no audience will ever see. Those invisible victories are the ones that ultimately shape an extraordinary life. By now, a pattern has probably begun to emerge. Each of these principles points toward the same destination. Not a life without difficulty. Not a life without emotion. Not a life where everything goes according to plan. But a life where your inner world is no longer held hostage by your outer circumstances. That brings us to the seventh and final principle. Practice letting go every single day. Many people imagine that emotional freedom arrives all at once, that one profound insight, one inspiring book, or one motivational video will permanently change how they think. The Stoics knew better. They understood that wisdom is not a destination. It is a practice. Just as the body grows stronger through consistent training, the mind becomes calmer through repeated discipline. Marcus Aurelius didn't write in his journal because he had already mastered himself. He wrote because he was still practicing. As emperor of Rome, he faced military campaigns, political betrayals, plague, and unimaginable responsibility. Yet each morning and evening, he returned to the same exercise, examining his own mind. That alone should tell us something important. Even one of history's most powerful men believed the greatest battle was within. Imagine treating your mind the way an athlete treats training. No one expects to build physical strength from a single workout. Progress comes from repetition. The same is true for emotional resilience. Every day offers opportunities to practice. When someone interrupts you, practice patience. When plans change unexpectedly, practice acceptance. When success comes your way, practice humility. When failure arrives, practice perspective. When fear whispers that you are not enough, practice courage by taking the next right step anyway. These moments may seem insignificant, but they are the very place where character is forged. We often wait for dramatic turning points before deciding to change. The Stoics would argue that transformation happens in the ordinary moments most people overlook. It happens when you choose not to respond to an insulting comment. It happens when you stop replaying yesterday's mistake and focus on today's responsibility. It happens when you resist the urge to compare your life with someone else's carefully curated highlight reel. It happens when you quietly keep a promise to yourself. These seemingly small victories reshape the architecture of your mind. Modern neuroscience supports this idea through the brain's remarkable ability to adapt. Repeated patterns of thought and behavior strengthen neural pathways over time. In other words, every time you choose a calmer response instead of an impulsive reaction, you reinforce that pattern. What begins as effort gradually becomes habit. The Stoics discovered this truth through observation centuries before science gave it a name. You become what you repeatedly practice. This is why self-mastery is never about perfection. Perfection is an impossible standard. There will be days when you lose your temper, days when anxiety returns, days when criticism stings more than you'd like, days when you care far too much about things beyond your control. The goal is not to eliminate those moments. The goal is to recover from them more quickly. Each setback becomes another opportunity to practice. Each mistake becomes another lesson. Each challenge becomes another reminder that philosophy is meant to be lived, not merely admired. There is another Stoic idea that beautifully captures this spirit: living according to nature. This phrase is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean retreating into the wilderness or rejecting modern life. It means living in harmony with reality rather than constantly fighting it. Human beings cannot control every outcome. We cannot prevent change. We cannot avoid uncertainty. We cannot escape mortality, but we can choose honesty over deception, courage over avoidance, wisdom over impulse, justice over selfishness. That is our nature at its best. When our actions align with these virtues, we experience a kind of peace that external success alone can never provide. Think back over everything we've explored. First, you learn to separate what you can control from what you cannot. Then, You stopped allowing other people's opinions to define your worth. You learned to release your grip on what was never meant to last. You discovered that emotions deserve acknowledgement, not unquestioning obedience. You remembered that time is finite and therefore precious. You committed yourself to building character instead of chasing reputation. And finally, you embraced the daily practice of letting go. Notice something remarkable. None of these principles require wealth. None require perfect circumstances. None depend on your education, your background, your age, or your status. They are available to anyone willing to practice them. That is part of what has made Stoicism endure. For more than 2,000 years, empires have risen and fallen. Technologies have transformed civilization. Entire cultures have changed. Yet the human mind continues to wrestle with the same fears, the same desires, the same insecurities, and the same search for meaning. We still worry about rejection. We still fear uncertainty. We still become attached to things we cannot keep. And we still possess the remarkable ability to rise above those tendencies through conscious practice. Perhaps that is why Stoicism feels so timeless. It doesn't promise an easier world. It prepares you to meet the world with greater clarity. Imagine your life 1 year from now if you genuinely applied these principles. The criticism that once ruined your week becomes a passing comment. The setbacks that once felt unbearable become opportunities to adapt. The uncertainty that once filled you with anxiety becomes a reminder to focus on today's actions. The need for constant validation begins to fade, not because life has become easier, but because you have become stronger. That is the quiet power of Stoicism. It transforms ordinary people, not by changing their circumstances, but by changing the lens through which they experience them. And perhaps the greatest paradox of all is this: the less you desperately cling to outcomes, the more fully you are able to live. The less you chase approval, the more authentic your relationships become. The less you fear loss, the more deeply you appreciate what you have. The less you try to control everything, the more peaceful your life becomes. This is the art of not caring. Not caring about trivial opinions, not caring about temporary setbacks, not caring about comparisons that steal your joy, not caring about circumstances that lie beyond your influence, so that you can care more deeply about what truly deserves your attention. Your character, your values, your loved ones, your purpose, your response. Because in the end, that is all that has ever truly belonged to you. The world will continue to change. People will continue to judge. Plans will continue to fail. Success will come and go. Time will continue to move forward without asking permission. But if you cultivate a disciplined mind, a virtuous character, and the wisdom to let go of what was never yours to control, you will carry something through every season of life that no circumstance can ever take away: an inner freedom. And once you discover that freedom, you'll realize it was never hidden somewhere outside of you. It was waiting to be uncovered within you all along. If this journey through Stoicism challenged the way you see yourself and the world, consider subscribing and joining us for the next exploration. We'll dive even deeper into timeless lessons on emotional mastery, resilience, human nature, and the practical wisdom of the Stoics. Ideas that can help you navigate modern life with greater clarity, courage, and peace. Until next time, remember this: you may not control everything that happens to you, But you can always choose the person you become because of it. And that choice is where true freedom begins.